महाराजनी जय, बापा श्रीनी जय, सदगुरु श्रीनी जय, स्वामीनारायण भगवाननी जय तथा अनंत अनादि मुक्तोनी जय. A humble prayer in their lotus feet and lotus feet of our Guru, Anadi Muktraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama and Leela Masi, to augment this assembly with their divinity and grace, and to enhance our knowledge and guide us towards them. Additionally, February 5th is Anadi Muktraj Param Pujya Leela Masi's birthday. She has led an exemplary life, inspiring all us aspirants. She was gentle yet strong, affectionate yet practical, and her organizational and planning skills would beat any C-level officer today. And of course, her divinity and grace lit the way for so many of us, so many times in our lives. I truly and humbly bow my head to her divine feet with utmost respect and awe, and request her divine blessings on all of us today and always. During past couple of weeks, I have received a suggestion from 2 or 3 people to pick up a little pace in speaking. So I might speak a little faster today. I will, however, not talk at the speed of my normal conversation. I talk very fast in my normal conversation. I will not talk at that speed because Anadi Muktraj Param Pujya Narayan Mama used to say that speaking too fast is not very helpful during learning and spiritual progress endeavors. So please stop me right away, unmute and stop me if my accent, my pronunciation, etc. are not clear as I speak a little faster. So last week we had talked about senses, quintessence, and mind. This will delve into one last thing on mind or man, about intellect, subconscious mind, and ego. We will then spend some time on what is liberation, why liberation, and is there a God. Following that, we'll touch upon endocrine system and chakras, and this will wrap up our conversation on mind, body, and soul. So one last but quite important thing about mind is the question that can our minds be controlled by others? Is hypnotism real? The answer is yes to both. Mind control is a technique used on soldiers in many nations in the present and in the past They have been known to commit acts under the influence of their superiors or the system itself, which even they are later surprised of. Mind control by language is a very common technique. We call it convincing or negotiation skills, where one person uses the power of language and reason to manipulate or divert or control the thoughts of others and gets them to agree on a solution. We call such people charismatic. Another common example of mind control is how the emotions in the movie or TV series make us get so involved in them that we feel elated or enraged or melancholy watching them. So while mind control is real, one thing we must all remember is that someone can control our mind only if we let them, either knowingly or unknowingly. There have been experiments done to show that some people are so strong-minded that they do not let themselves to hypnotism. Hypnotism is nothing but letting someone in our mind and subconscious mind. If we build the internal resilience that we discussed last week, and always keep Lord Swaminarayan and his mukta with us, there is no way anyone can control our mind. I have a personal experience on this from the life of my grandfather, which I'll share someday. But along these lines, there is another debate that goes on about ghosts being really taking over control of someone's mind. But if we think about it, ghosts are nothing but souls who do not have a physical body. Just as other human beings are able to manipulate our minds, so are ghosts. The only difference is that when ghosts exercise mind control, they also take control of the body as well in order to fulfill their desires. So that was one last thing that I wanted to talk about on mind as to what is mind control and is mind control real. But let's now move on to the next inner organ, which is buddhi or intellect. Sriji Maharaj has mentioned in Garida Pratham 12th Vachanamritam that sanshay or doubt, reason, analysis, nishchay or determination, will, decision making, nidra or sleep, and smruti or memory reside in the intellect. Intellect is also the seat of knowledge of anything and everything, and the knowledgeable awareness of the senses is also due to the intellect. We can relate all these functions to the frontal cortex of the brain. The immediate short-term memory and memory related to activity of senses and their knowledge are all stored in the intellect. Scientists have determined that there is an area in the frontal lobe that manages an internal body clock, which determines our sleep cycle. This internal clock is also sensitive to light. But we already knew this, didn't we? That sleep resides in the intellect. The internal clock also determines the effectiveness of frontal lobe. Those with high frontal lobe activity count time faster, and those with low frontal lobe activity count time slower. One interesting research around knowledge is that knowledge is hard to decay with age. Through study of preserved brain sections of Einstein, it is determined that Einstein had large number of glia than a normal person. Glia are cells in the brain responsible for supporting, protecting, and repairing neurons. So his knowledge was preserved better, and he was able to relate more things together. Interestingly, larger the brain, more is the percentage of glia cells. Nematodes contain only a few glia. A fly has 25% glia cells in the brain. Mouse have 65%. Humans have 90%. And elephant has 95%. Science has been so focused on neurons that the research on glia and its function is just in its infancy. But based on what we know about Einstein's brain and what the glia cells do, maybe they play an important part in what we call as intellect in spiritual world, as they help preserve knowledge. So that was just another research that I thought was very interesting. But one very important aspect of intellect that I wanted to spend some time on was depression. Depression and stress are becoming very common in all generations these days. While depression is attributed to hormonal imbalance physically and misaligned expectations from the world psychologically, intellect can come to rescue. The power to resolve, the power of determination lies in the intellect, and knowledge also lies in the intellect. In Sarangpur 18th Vachnamritam, Sriji Maharaj has said, an ignorant tries to tackle a problem by sleeping or crying or picking up fights or giving up food. Sometimes the ignorant goes to the extreme of committing suicide. The knowledgeable, he says, associates with elevated ones, understands the inner workings, and thoughtfully eliminates the problem. So an intellectual person, through the sheer power of analysis, reasoning, knowledge, and faith in Lord Swaminarayan and his Anadimukta, can overcome any and all depression and situation. So the best way during such times is to overcome the effect of the hormones or the situation by positive and powerful thinking. Let's not tie ourselves down by hormones and situations. They keep changing. But what has a longer life is our knowledge, our internal strength and faith. So intellect controls to think positive, to be resolved and determined, to do the right thing, is equally important as the control of mind and senses. As mentioned in Gajara Pratham Prakran 50th 50, Vachnamritam, that the one who is not using the intellect to progress on the spiritual path is the most ignorant, even if he or she is smart and intelligent in worldly matters. Both Sikshapatri and Bhagavad Gita say that the scripture, which is the Sikshapatri and Bhagavad Gita itself, the scripture should not be given to the one with demonic intellect. So the intellect can be of different kinds. One form could lead to negativity and make us fall prey to demonic things, whereas the other can help us become a good human being and progress on spiritual paths. Also, the neural paths that define the intellect can be changed. So we need to continue working on it all the time to make our intellect bright and positive. There is one incident from life of Swaminarayan Bhagwan. In a procession in his honor, he was once riding an elephant. But while the procession was on and he was seated on the elephant, he started eating a cucumber with its juice dripping all over. Looking at that, one person said, "He sure is God himself. No ordinary person will dare to eat cucumber like this in his own procession, sitting on an elephant. He won't have the guts to do that." Looking at the same thing, another person said, "Look at him. He does not even know how to eat a cucumber." So it is all about how our intellect is. Is it positive or negative? The first step to make a better intellect is to feed it with positive thoughts and resolve that no matter how others are, I will become a good and a genuine human being. Only when we become genuine human beings that we'll be able to progress on the path of spiritualism. So, those were some thoughts on the buddhi, inner organ, the intellect. Let's move on to chit or subconscious mind. Subconscious mind is much talked about in the field of psychology and spiritualism. In Gajara Pratham Prakran 12th Vachnamritam, Sriji Maharaj has described chit or subconscious mind as chit is undifferentiated from Mahat Tattva. Entire universe is stored in its subtle form in Mahatattva, and it is immaculate, brilliant, clean, pure Sattva oriented, and peaceful. So just as Mahatattva is the subtle store for the entire universe and all the souls within the universe, Chit, or subconscious mind, is the subtle store for the soul. We will talk more about Mahatattva in a couple of weeks. But to understand this concept, let's go to my favorite laptop example. We had talked about taking a backup on a hard drive when switching from one laptop to another. But this requires every person switching a laptop to have an external hard drive. Nature has a more efficient solution to the problem, and we too have recently adopted this. Every week, Vishalbhai uploads our interaction on Google Drive. Google Drive itself is a huge memory store, and it gives away parts of it to users like Vishalbhai for him to store his own stuff. It is not exactly the same, but a similar concept between Mahatattva and Chit. So nature has been using cloud technology for years now. So it is good to know that Mahatattva and Chit are undifferentiated. But what is Chit? A while ago, it was believed that subconscious mind mapped to cerebellum in the brain. But let's look at it with a fresh perspective. When we do anything, read, write, talk to others, help others, cheat others, it all gets stored in the short-term memory in the frontal lobe. It is believed in scientific community, and there is no definitive answer yet, but that's why it's a belief, that it is during the time we sleep that our short-term memory gets converted to long-term memory, which is stored in hippocampus. These then get converted to long-term memories to be carried forward from one body to another, or in other words, one birth to another, which can probably be physically mapped to genes. However, just like mind and intellect, what spiritualism calls subconscious mind is a subtle sentient awareness and not a particular brain or body part. To understand this, let's think about what determines the features, etc., before a child takes life. It is said that parents' genes do that, but what determines which genes from which parent will be picked up? Where are these records kept? There has to be some subtle place to keep these records. So just as the subtle sentient awareness in and around amygdala is the mind, there is a subtle sentient awareness around the memory store, the long-term memory in the hippocampus and the long-term memory in the genes. And that is the chit or subconscious mind. Chit stores our actions and experiences. Science has found that decisions are already made subconsciously in the brain before even we become aware of them. So what are these decisions based on? These are based on our past experiences stored in the chit. So with that, let's move to our last inner organ, the ego or the ahankar. The ego, like chit, is tied to the universal ego or ahankar. The universal ego is of three types: sattva, rajas, and tamas. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the cause of states of mind. And we will talk about the universal ego subsequently. But as far as our ego goes, based on Gada Pratham 12th Vachanamritam, it has three attributes: sattva, rajas, and tamas, which have their characteristics. At a high level, sattva is peace and calm, rajas is activity and desires, and tamas is darkness, ignorance, and arrogance. Ego is the feeling of me, my, mine, and myself, as we discussed in our very first interaction. Ego is what we identify ourselves with. This feeling makes us react and behave during our interactions with others and outside world based on the pervading attribute. As other inner organs, there is a lot of literature available, and not just in religious and philosophical scriptures, but also in psychology and management on how to overcome ego. But one simple approach is to take the ego through a progressive journey through continuous improvement. First, get rid of arrogance and ignorance associated with the self by engaging in interesting activities and pursuing interesting desires. Then get rid of the association of the self from the activities and desires and move to calm and peace. Once we become calm and peaceful, we then become capable of moving to the next step. Give up identification with the self to identify with God. Just as we did with mind and senses, overcoming ego is a topic in itself. And we can discuss it separately if there is enough interest later. But for now, let's look at some scientific findings around ego. One thing scientists are trying to find out is, when does the sense of self become visible in a child? They are working on it by showing a mirror to the child and understanding when does child recognize that what they see in the mirror is their own image. I believe this age is determined to be 8 to 12 months. Another experiment is, when does a child become conscious about its own image? What will others think about me? That self-awareness is, I believe, determined between age of 3 to 5 years. Hindu scriptures say that a child should be considered completely naive and innocent till the age of 5. So again, we already knew that. However, the identification experiments only go up to the identification of the soul with this body, the current body. So it is at some level ego, but it does not provide the complete picture. Anadimuktraj Parampuja Narayan Mama used to say that when one becomes completely devoid of ego, the body will not exist. The fact that the soul has taken a birth indicates presence of ego. And this ego goes beyond one body. It continues and carries forward from one birth to the next. Another interesting research on ego, it's again in very initial stages, is that scientists are now figuring out that sense of self is stronger in the left hemisphere of the brain. Maybe in future we will be able to relate that part to the ego, just as we have mapped other inner organs to some parts of the brain or body. So far we talked about inner organs and senses separately. Let's take a quick holistic view. We only desire things that we see around us. About 25 years ago, no one desired a cell phone or a smartphone since it did not exist. Similarly, 10 years ago, no one desired a tablet. So we only desire things that exist around us. The mind, from where the desires arise, has tremendous power. So when we desire something, the thought or the desire travels from mind to the intellect. Intellect analyzes and reasons the desire and then decides to either pursue it or leave it. Ego also feeds into the decision-making process. Sometimes the memories of past experiences from subconscious mind also feed into this decision-making. So after the analysis and decision, the mind then commands the senses to act appropriately. This entire process of desiring, thinking through it, and acting on it creates an impression on subconscious mind. The entire experience and lessons learned during the experience are also stored as an impression in the subconscious mind. The impressions of the associated fruits are also initially stored in the subconscious mind. As we discussed a couple of weeks back, the impressions are formed only if we are attached either to the desires or the actions or the result of those actions. If we are not attached to them, the impressions are not formed. And that completes the cycle of one desire. This cycle continues for every desire. So that was a holistic view on that whole process of how it works. This wraps up our conversation on mind, body, and soul. This knowledge is useful to anyone and everyone, irrespective of whether or not they want to progress spiritually. There are a couple of things I want to touch on before we move on to talk about what is liberation and why liberation. Research on human body is reaching greater heights with every day that goes by. One of the findings is that we share 85% of our genes with zebrafish and 95% with a chimpanzee. Also, so far, even after all the research and all that is being done, we have only understood 2% of the genetic code. We also know that genetic molecules have the ability to store memory like neurons. There is research going on to create liquid brain to download all our memories into using extracted genetic molecules. University of Minnesota is trying to grow human organs perfectly matching a person using that person's DNA, stem cells, and synthetic materials. This research has made tremendous progress. There is another similar research going on in UCLA to tap similarity of heartbeat and pulses on a jellyfish and use jellyfish cells to develop organs for human beings. However, these cells need an electric trigger to work. They do not have life to work on their own. I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. Anati Muktraj Param Puja Narayan Mama used to say that no matter how much science progresses, it will not be able to create a soul. Through some experiments and research, scientists may figure out a way to capture a soul into a body or an organ, but it will not be able to create a soul. In Gadada Pratham 13th Vachanamritam, Sriji Maharaj has said that when a plant is created through a grafting process, the soul in the original plant does not get split into two, but a second soul gets into the grafted plant. And it was the second soul's destiny to be born that way. So there might be some souls in future whose destiny might be to be born in a lab. I'm using might be since this has not happened yet. We are only talking hypothetically. My dad told me the story of Ramayana and Mahabharata in great details when I was a kid. The story was not available on TV and DVDs when I was a kid. as it is today. So I heard it from my dad. In Ramayana, all four brothers were born out of a yagna. So were Draupadi and her brother Drishtadyumna in Mahabharata. They too were the products of a yagna. Also, 100 Kauravas were said to have been born in pots. It was their destiny to be born that way. So if, hypothetically, scientists figure out a way to capture a soul through their scientific experiments, it will be the destiny of the soul to be born that way. It will not mean that science has been able to create a soul. Another thing that I hear very often these days is, what is wrong in eating artificially engineered eggs or synthetically produced meat, since it does not involve killing any soul's body? One thing that scriptures preaching non-violence do not clearly mention is that there is violence towards others and there is violence towards self. Maybe, and I'm saying maybe since we really do not know what happens in there, but maybe there is no soul in artificially engineered eggs or synthetically produced meat. So there may not be violence towards others involved in it. But what about the violence towards the self? The chemical composition of meat is such that it takes a long time to digest. It rots in our intestines for 3 to 7 days before it gets digested. Secondly, non-vegetarian food is characterized by tamas. By intake of tamasic food, we promote tamas in ourselves. The effects are subtle and not observable right away, but gradually we become arrogant, ignorant, non-sentient. So much for pleasing the sense of taste or trying to blend in. Why would one put oneself through such violence? When someone breaks our trust, we feel so violated and upset. But what about us violating our own self? Why does that go unnoticed? Just because it is ourself? After so much of promoting about fertilizers to grow crops from late 60s to late 80s, since early 90s, there is a trend to move towards organic foods. Even with milk, people are now moving to non-hormone induced organic milk. It took us 3 to 5 decades to even begin to understand the effects of the chemicals. Who knows how many years it will take to analyze the effect of eating synthetically generated meat? Why not stay ahead of the game, stop violating ourselves, and stay on track to make our body more conducive to spiritual progress? or any other progress for that matter. So talking about spiritual progress, let's transition into what is liberation and why liberation. We live in a limited world. There is only so much pleasure that can be attained. There is only so much quality that can be demanded. There is only so much variety that can be provided. There is only so much quantity that is available. I use this example very often. I'm sure everybody knows Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was an actor and also ex-governor of California. When he was the governor, he had 18 Hummers, those heavy-duty bulletproof vehicles. He had 18 of those. What would one do with 18 Hummers? At the end of the day, each one is only a Hummer, nothing more, nothing less. So that is the limitation of vehicular luxury, and it is imposed by the limitation of the human race in developing that technology. Another example of limitation that I really like to use is gold. Everybody likes gold. Gold is a precious metal and is formed when big stars go supernova. All cultures and societies in the world value gold. But there is only so much gold that is available to us. There are many gold mines here in California that have run out of gold and have now become tourist attractions. But where is this limitation of gold coming from? Physicists believe that there is so much gold in Earth's core that we can cover entire Earth's surface, be it water or land, with 10 to 12 feet thick sheet of gold. Same goes with diamonds. So the Earth has plenty, but it is the human limitation that keeps us from extracting it. We really don't know how to extract it. Then there are other limitations of the physical world. The chip being designed for brain or body implants keep getting smaller by the day. But they have a limitation that they cannot become smaller than 5 atoms. That is the structure of the basic core of the chip. So there are physical limitations. And then last week, we also learned that our senses are limited. So the bottom line is we live in a limited world. We are limited, either due to our bodily boundaries or mental boundaries or societal boundaries or physical universe boundaries. We crave for freedom from them. And just as there are degrees of these limitations, personal limitations, human race limitations, earth limitations, solar system limitations, physical world limitations. So just as there are degrees of limitations, there are related degrees of freedom or independence. We get free from one, but remain trapped in another. But freedom from each degree of binding is, well, a freedom. So are we cheating ourselves by accepting lower degrees of freedom? Don't we wish to be boundless, immense, and free completely? Liberation is all about becoming free every step of the way. We all crave that. We all desire that. That is what liberation is. Freedom from limitations. Freedom from bindings. So that answers what is liberation. Liberation is freedom. Some limitations or boundaries are hard to break, and some are easy. Let's take an example of a photon to understand that. A photon is a particle of light. A photon emitted from a light bulb takes a little time to become free of the light bulb and travel to our eye. But it is able to do that in a quantifiable time. Now think of a photon trapped inside the sun. It gets flung here and there. There are so many other photons flying around. They collide with each other. And one lucky photon finally manages to reach the surface of the sun. The electromagnetic force of the sun pushes us back inside. And this could continue for millions of years. And this is what the physicists have determined. That this is what happens to the photons inside the sun. It might take forever for a photon to escape the sun. So bigger the limitation, harder it is to escape or become free. Another analogy is, and we'll continue using this as we go forward, is that of a corporate world. Progress is inherent to the human nature. An engineer wants to be free of limitations imposed by the team lead, and therefore wants to become a team lead. Till then, he or she does not realize that the team lead is also limited by the manager, and so on. As one progresses upwards, transition to the next level becomes more and more difficult. Rising up to a manager is difficult, but not very difficult. But transition from manager to director or director to VP is very difficult. Similarly, another example, during our course of study in school, as we transition from one grade to another, we become free of one grade, but immediately get bound by the next grade. And each grade is consequently difficult. So we continually want to progress to gain higher and higher degrees of freedom. Progress, therefore, is the reason for liberation. That answers why liberation. With the body that is given to us, we may choose to do nothing or choose to progressively become free. Continuing with our laptop example, one may choose to use it for internet surfing and watching videos, or may use it to code an extraordinary application, sell it to Google, and become rich and capable of buying much better laptops. Does it not make sense to do the latter? If we desire progress and freedom, then it automatically means we desire liberation. It is as simple as that. It's just that the degree of freedom varies, and so does the degree of liberation. So, in a nutshell, liberation is nothing but becoming free from bindings and progressing. And this definition of liberation also answers why we should pursue liberation, to progress and to become free. We also discussed that there are degrees of bindings, and using different examples saw that depending on the bindings we overcome, the degree of liberation also varies. And we'll talk about these degrees in details as we continue forward, but I just wanted to establish this fundamental here that there are degrees of liberation. So, with all these latest discoveries and science progressing so fast, one common question that I'm hearing more and more and more these days is that, is there a God? A couple of weeks ago, we had talked about Galileo. Galileo was imprisoned by church for supporting heliocentrism instead of geocentrism, stating that Earth revolves around the sun. Galileo, before he became a physicist and a theoretical astronomer, wanted to become a priest. Later, he had also developed interest in astrology. There is a similar thing about Newton as well. There is another physicist in UK in the present day who has written 17 books on astronomy and has finally become a priest. His name is John Falkinghorn, and I'll include a link to his Wikipedia in the slides. He believes that though it can all be explained away by mathematics and physics, someone must have created these paradigms in the first place. Einstein, though did not believe in normal religious practices, went ahead and talked about cosmic religion, a whole new belief system. On the other hand, accomplished physicists like Stephen Hawking, who refuse to accept existence of God, say that it all works as design, and design just happened on its own. But then they are unable to explain the behavior of black holes, even after their lifetime worth of work. So while one might say that physicists and mathematicians are split in their belief in a higher power, they are all unified in their struggle to find one mathematical equation that defines entire creation. They keep coming up with different theories. One such theory is the string theory, which talks about 9 dimensions. We have 3, they say there are 9 dimensions. And that other worlds are intertwined or overlapping with ours. So if string theory is true, maybe one of these other worlds is the world of subtle bodies, or the world of Dana, or the world of days. Who knows? But they said there is a possibility that it exists. There is another theory that everything is formed of loops, not strings. Since everything else is circular or spherical, like stars, planets, galaxies. So a loop theory. Based on that approach, arriving at one single mathematical equation predicts even more intertwined worlds and even more particles of proton than have been discovered so far. I worked for Electronic Arts on one project long time ago. Their very initial versions of Sims Online. It internally used mathematical equations to define the behavior of avatars, the landscape, etc. These techniques are extensively used these days, not just in games, but also in machine learning and robotics. There is an eerie similarity in the output of some of those equations and the real world. So just as someone is writing these equations in our world for the Sims games, there must be someone who must have designed and implemented those real-world mathematical equations. If physicists and mathematicians refuse that, then they definitely need to consider the question of what is beyond the bindings of those mathematical equations. All these equations do is define the limitation. They do not tell us what is beyond them or how to overcome them. That answer lies only with the spiritual masters. Let's take this a little more forward and ask this question to ourselves. Again, no need to answer this to anyone. This is just for introspection. Why is it that we give in so easily to peer pressure, trends, fashion, but ask so many questions when it comes to belief in God? Is it because we cannot see God? If the answer is yes, then the next question is, have we made any attempts to see God? If yes, then I'm sure we have felt His presence in one form or another. If we have not made any attempts, then how can we definitely say one way or another about His existence? Once, Jesus was passing by a village, and based on the law of the village, the villagers had gathered to throw stones at a poor lady as a punishment for some sin she had committed. He could not bear this and stepped in and said, I'm not questioning your justice, but only those who have never in their life committed any sin can throw a stone. Others do not have the right to do that. Everyone slowly put their stones down. So let's not refute the belief in God without ever having made any attempts to seek His presence. Only if through our efforts we have established with proof that He does not exist, that we have the right to make such a bold statement. Even science is saying that there are other worlds and other dimensions which even the latest and greatest scientific equipment cannot perceive. So there are things that we do not know so much about. And science is humble enough to accept it. Then who are we to blindly dismiss existence of God through sheer arrogance? When non-believers ask for a proof of God's existence, let's start asking them for a proof that God does not exist. The search for proof will not be a wasted effort, since attaining Him is progress. If He created the universe, He is definitely greater in power, more resourceful, greater circle of influence than us. And progress, as we discussed, is liberation. So if we find Him, we get liberated. If we don't find Him, then we have proof that He does not exist. Belief in God is therefore not a topic for debate, but a topic to initiate a search. So we'll now move to one last thing that I wanted to cover in our soul, body, and mind discussion, was have a quick conversation on endocrine system and the chakras. So by the way, I did not create this picture, borrowed it from internet, and the last slide has all the links that I've kind of referred to earlier during our conversation. So we have talked about liberation, and one common and fundamental belief system in the spiritual progress theory of Hinduism is the belief of chakra and kundalini. Chakras are the energy centers, and kundalini is the energy for spiritual progress. Interestingly, there is a one-on-one mapping between chakras and endocrine glands. I will not be going in the details of each endocrine gland. I've included a link to an all-comprehensive chart of endocrine system for those who are interested. I will also not focus on each chakra as such. There is a huge amount of information available on the web around chakras, and it does not directly, there is always an indirect relation, but it does not directly relate to the path of meditation explained by Anadi Muktraj, Param Puja Narayan Mama, and Abji Bapa Shri. But its knowledge is important to have, since it will help us understand the energy centers and their endocrine system association. So, the Muladhara chakra. Now, there is a lot of debate on what Muladhara chakra relates to, and people try to explain it in many different ways. So, staying outside of that debate, let's say that the Muladhara chakra is the coccyx, the very tail end of our spinal cord, and then the next one is the Swadhisthana chakra, associated with our gonads and reproductive organs. Then in the navel is the Manipur chakra, associated with pancreas and adrenal glands. In the heart is the Anahat chakra, associated with thymus gland. In the throat is the Vishuddha chakra, associated with the thyroid. Then there is the Agna chakra, or the third eye, associated with the pituitary gland. And the last one is the Sahasrara chakra, associated with the pineal gland. So Gya and Gna are the same letter. In Hindi, it's pronounced like Gya. In Gujarati, it's pronounced like Gna. So I'll stay with the Gujarati pronunciation and call it Agna chakra. But that's the association. And then, as I said, I have included links, so once I share the presentation, everyone will get those links. So while all the chakras are important and have their own relevance, there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about a little bit today. Someday, if we have a conversation about meditation, we will probably talk about all of the chakras in detail. Pituitary gland is called the master gland and is responsible for regulating all other endocrine glands. The spot of Agna chakra is a direct access to the dangling pituitary gland from in between the two hemispheres of the brain. So Agna chakra is right in between the two brows. Doing a chandlo on Agna chakra, especially by the elevated ones, helps bring harmony to all endocrine glands and the chakras and expedites spiritual progress. The reason for the color of the chandlo to be red is that our minds associate the color red with victory. There is a scientific research done on colors which shows that we associate the color red with victory and valor, and that it slows down time for us. What it means is that we can accomplish more in less time in presence of red color. Also, Sriji Maharaj has mentioned in Vachanamritam, I could not locate the number, that mind keeps moving like a pendulum. Lolak nijam halya karet. And other Hindu spiritual scriptures describe mind to be the size of a seed of a pea. So maybe they are referring to the pituitary gland. And pituitary gland's neurotransmitters might be affecting amygdala that has been identified as seat of emotions and desires. It is not far-fetched because the hormonal secretion of the glands do affect our emotions and moods. And since pituitary gland is the master gland, the subtle sentient awareness that we call mind could also be residing in pituitary gland. The second thing I want to talk about is that scientific discoveries show that humans are wired to trust. We want to trust and have faith. When our trust is rewarded and reciprocated, pituitary gland produces oxytocin, which is called the feel-good chemical. This release of oxytocin in turn enhances faith and trust. Interestingly, Sriji Maharaj has mentioned in Vachanamritam that God cannot be attained through logic, but through faith. Tarke karine Bhagwan nathi pamata, Vishwasa karine pamai. And the Agna chakra is also associated with trust and faith. I found it to be a very interesting correlation and thought of sharing here. So with that, This wraps up our extensive topic of mind, body, and soul and liberation. There are many things in this conversation where we can go in further details and spend more time. But our first goal is to understand each spiritual stratum and the overall framework. Spiritualism otherwise is a vast topic, and we can easily get wrapped up in minute details. So far, whatever we discussed is all at our level. We have made fleeting references to other levels, but have not really explored them. We will continue into next strata starting next week. But before we do that, we'll build a foundation. So next week we will look at the overview of the spiritual world so that cross-references between strata are easily understood. And we will also talk about some common and overarching things like immanent and transcendent form of God, cause and effect, concept of soul and body continued through the perishable world, distinction of perishable and unperishable world, three attributes, and dual nature of the existence. This will lay the foundation for our further journey. So today it took longer than our usual course. I wanted to thank the Sabha for giving that extra time. Next week onwards we'll maintain our 1 hour window. Jai Swaminarayan Badaine. Vishal Bhai, over to you.
Jai Swaminarayan. I'm going to just